This is the Recivilized Podcast with your host, Chris Sharukas. On the podcast, I talk with bright and sensible people about how we can create a better way of life. This session features Colt Black, a member of the Board of Education in Frederick County, Maryland. On it, he talks about why the public schools there are failing and how to fix them. Colt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
So, we're here to talk about why the public schools are failing and how to fix them.
Sure.
First, let's talk about the public schools failing. Are they actually failing?
Well, I think if you look at the latest scores on the Maryland report card, if we look at Frederick County as a district, I think that we can probably point to some very hardline data to say that it is. I'll just take a recent sampling here from 2024 in the mathematics arena. This is in regard to the Algebra 1 fluency here in Frederick County Public Schools. So statewide, now this is to give you a really gloomy picture here. Statewide, we have 20% proficiency in Algebra 1. Now, when you put Frederick County up to that, we're at 25.2%. While it's better marginally, it's still an F. And we can look at the other subjects, English, science, you name it, and the percentages are still very, very low in comparison to what a passing grade would be in accordance with the Maryland State School report cards and the Maryland Department of Education. So I think that that's a resounding yes here with Frederick County Public Schools.
Hey, I'm glad you brought that up because I took a look at the report card myself, and what I found was this. Fewer than half of the students are on grade in math here in the county. Barely half are on grade in English. 3 out of 4 can't pass their graduation exams. That's what I saw on the report card. And I also noticed something else. When I dug into the AP statistics for here in the county, I found that most students here in the county taking AP classes get A's or B's in the classes. And yet, when they take their AP exams, they get the equivalent of C's, D's, and F's.
That is definitely something that I have seen as well, and looking at the report card, and it certainly paints a grim picture for our public schools here in Frederick County, does it not?
It sure does, and I think it goes beyond test scores and grades as well. Truancy is going through the roof.
Absolutely.
I mean, I looked at the stats on that too, and what I'm seeing is 1 out of 4 students here misses weeks or months of school. Unexcused absences.
Sure. Well, and I think that part of that can be attributed to the students not necessarily feeling like they're learning anything at school. Students are bored. Why would anyone want to attend school when they're feeling like they're bored and they're not being challenged? I think we're not demanding and expecting enough of our students here in Frederick County to be able to put that idea of academic excellence back into focus for them. And I think that that's what's contributing to a lot of the truancy here in Frederick County.
I think you are right on. Now, a few years ago, I did some substitute teaching in the schools, and I was shocked at what they consider to be a curriculum these days. I mean, I'm in high school classes, and
sure.
I'm seeing assignments that looked more like something you would hand out to a 5th grader.
Well, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to the current nature at Frederick County Public Schools for buying canned curriculum. It's very interesting. We have a whole curriculum and instruction department structure within Frederick County Public Schools, yet I wonder what they're actually doing at central office, because they're supposed to be writing curriculum, yet they're buying everything pre-written. And I'm actually wondering how much time is being spent in looking to see if this curriculum is actually going to work for our students here in Frederick County.
You know what? I think a lot of teachers are wondering the same thing because they seem to be burning out.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of concern around the idea. Of course, we hear about wages and those type of monetary things with teachers. But I think work environment is an absolutely huge factor in the morale of our teachers. If you come into, first off, let's talk about building conditions here in Frederick County, places like Brunswick High School. When you come into buildings that are not being properly maintained, that are unsafe, that's going to probably sink you into a little bit of a depression as a teacher or staff member in a school. Put on top of that your safety factor in the schools? What are we doing to ensure staff safety? Some of these kids are absolutely out of control in these classes, and we're expecting our teachers, our educational and IAs to be able to deal with those students and not put hands on those students. They can't protect themselves in the schools. So I think we're creating a lot of dangerous situations and asking a lot of our educators and paraeducational professionals to do extra work that they was never intended to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually talked to a few teachers who have echoed that sentiment. They say, hey, we're here to teach. We're not here to be social services counselors. We're not here to be crowd control bouncers. And they often get pressed into service for these things.
Well, and it's really sad because, I mean, I have 3 kids in the Frederick County public school system. And, when they come home and there's been a fight at school and the teachers are pretty much told to just stand on the sidelines and let it occur, we talk about bullying in our school system. And I think that the behavior and bullying, I think all these things go hand in hand to create a situation of depressed morale for our staff members in the schools because they see these things going on. They do care about these kids. So many times they form these relationships with the students that are, especially the great teachers that are lifelong relationships. And yet they're not able to effectively do their job because they're being handcuffed by policy and regulation. And certainly I think that there's some ideologies that's permeating through the school that makes a lot of our staff feel uncomfortable and unwelcome in being themselves. So I think we have a lot of challenges here in Frederick County Public Schools between academic success, recruitment and retention of quality teachers, as well as ensuring that our students are safe and secure while they're at school. So we have a lot of work to do.
Well, that leads me into my next question. I mean, I think we've established that, the schools here, they're pretty bad. But the question is why? Why are the public schools here failing? What are the reasons?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that there's a long laundry list of reasons as to why we're having these problems. You could go all the way back to the 1920s when compulsory attendance of public schools even became a thing. So, there was a lot of regulation at the time that drove out the idea of parochial and religious schools that set things up for a future of people who did not have a sense of direction in their life. And I think that has been a culture that has been propped up within our public school system, and it's led to a degradation of our societal norms within the schools. And it's created a situation for some political ideologies to really creep up into the schools that is not necessarily the best social environment for our staff and our students.
Well, I think we're thinking about the same ideology, and I think it has a name, which is wokeness. The way I see it is really it's kind of the latest in the series of crackpot ideas adopted by the schools. Now, I went to Walkersville Elementary in the 70s, and the crackpot ideas back then were open space classrooms.
Sure.
The idea that, hey, we're gonna bust down all the walls, and you're gonna absorb information from the classrooms next door. Well, what it created was this noisy mess of chaos.
I could only imagine.
So, crackpot idea number 2, foam furniture. It took about 15 minutes for Billy Eichelberger to have it pop full of holes like a pincushion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we've certainly did some rather dumb things over the years with school design that has been non-conducive to a school environment. And some of those ideas, it was cost savings, but in so many of those ideas is it's the latest, greatest, we have to try it. And I think that that's part of our problem in the school system is everything becomes the latest, greatest craze and instead of sticking to what's tried and true and known to work. I think that sometimes we get caught up in the fads, and I think that our students have suffered for it. I think that our staff has suffered for it, and it's time that we make those changes to get the ship righted. To stop engaging in the fad play. Let's actually get back to what works.
I totally agree, and I would point out that when it comes to wokeness, being the latest in a series of crackpot ideas, The thing that people in the school system don't seem to realize is that it destroys everything it touches. Countries, cities, institutions, families, individuals. First it makes them ugly, then it makes them hostile, and then it makes them completely dysfunctional.
Absolutely.
Whether you're talking about San Francisco or Boeing Corporation or Hollywood or even really all of England these days. It's a big list.
Yes, absolutely. And what's so sad is we have the individuals who will absolutely stick to their politically driven ideology of wokeism in exchange for trampling the rights of the individual. We've seen that time and again, whether that has to deal with pronouns in the schools and forcing those who are of a religious background, or even if you could be a complete atheist and maybe you just have a conscientious objection because you understand biology. Right? We teach biology in school. We teach these basic scientific facts and these scientific truths, and to some, those same scientific truths translates into religious truths. And yet, for some reason, we have this idea that we have to keep our foot on the gas pedal into this woke ideology to silence and stifle those who have traditional backgrounds and values, whether they're teachers, whether they're students, whether they're other employees of the school system. But we have to stifle them and trample their rights in exchange for maintaining a woke political ideology. And that is truly dangerous, and it is non-productive when it comes to stimulating individual thought and creativity. We're not fostering an environment of true tolerance. It is a complete farce in our schools, what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And it's time for that to change.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the things that has been a problem with woke ideology is that I think you mentioned this before, it's shifted the focus of the schools away from education and onto social services, social indoctrination, social activism. So now you've got a school system that used to, stick to the knitting.
Sure.
And focus on educating kids. Now it thinks of itself as a one-stop shop for social services. I think the former board president said, schools have to focus on wraparound services. Well, what are wraparound services? Things like, psychotherapy and things like that. So it's actually hiring psychologists and therapists at over twice the rate it's hiring teachers these days.
Absolutely. And you have a very progressive lens that's being wrapped around with the idea of the community schools. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but community schools aren't just mental health. We go to things like English as a second language for, say, the parents of non-English speaking students. We go to various health services. We go to various other social services accoutrements through the schools. And when we start bringing these things in, I'm not saying that the schools could not be a place for other departments and agencies to provide services through, but the Board of Education, the Frederick County Public School System itself should not be providing those services because we have lost track of what our most basic mission is, and that is educating the youth of our county and of our community. And we can certainly partner with these outside agencies to provide those services. I think that certainly making sure that, for example, with nutrition, that students are going home, that they have a meal. I think that that's a worthwhile cause socially. But I don't think that the school system should be putting those type of social services together. We need to bring in our community partners, whether they're government agencies or whether they're charitable organizations, to assist them in doing that type of work. The schools can be the launch pad. We just need to make sure that we're maintaining those partnerships correctly, but the schools themselves should not be providing the services.
I think that's a good distinction to make because a lot of the problems in the schools these days are being brought into them by the kids from home. They're having problems at home and they bring them with them to school. And if you really want to address these problems, the place to do that is at home.
Absolutely.
And that means county social services, not the schools.
Sure, and the other thing of it is too, to kind of get a slightly off topic here, is government agencies can't always do the work of charitable organizations, and I think that sometimes we get so hyper focused because of being with the county schools being a government agency, we don't look to our community partners in the nonprofit sector. We don't look to our charitable organizations or religious organizations or fraternal organizations for some of these pieces of assistance that our communities need. I mean, if a school principal sees that there's some of these needs in his or her school's community, we should be working to engage with these outside services, and it should be done on a local school-by-school level. It should not have organization at the central office because the central office doesn't see these kids every day. The local school does. So I think that the autonomy needs to be given to our administrators who are in the school buildings themselves to be able to determine what level of assistance and social services their students needs, and to work with the parent-teacher organizations, to work with the community at large to bring in those services to the schools. And let's get the Board of Education and FCPS out of the business of being the social services of Frederick County.
Sounds like a good idea to me, because if you've got a school system where academics are an afterthought, then they start dumbing down curricula. For instance, in the county now, you can take a class in media literacy, but you can no longer take a class in Russian. Remember back in the 90s, you could. They had a fluent Russian speaker teaching classes in Russian at TJ. But now you can't do that.
Right, absolutely. I mean, we are continually hiring mental health professionals and some of these other social outreach types into our school system, and we're lagging on hiring teachers. I think that our money is better served in investing in our educators instead of behavioral health and social services programs. We need to be focusing on our educators. We want them to have a livable wage. We want them to be at the top of their game. We need to start investing in what really matters, and we know where it counts.
So let me ask you this. Do we have enough money for the schools? Are they funded well enough to get the job done?
Well, I think that that's a double-edged sword. I mean, when we look at the budget is not written for your average citizen on the street to understand. Hold
on. You mean that me, a parent of a FCPS student, it's not the 248-page budget isn't written so I can understand it?
No, one would think. But, even sitting as a member of the Board of Education and you're handed additional documentation, I mean, we're talking hundreds of pages of a budget to go through, and we're only given a few months to approve it. To actually really track down where this money's going, we do not truly have an appropriate accounting of every dollar. We almost need like the Elon Musk type to come through with a Doge type program into FCPS and really get into understanding these departments' budgets within the county school system. It is deplorable what's being done with our money, and isn't it interesting? The cuts that's made to the school budget each year when cuts has to be made, who are they made to? It's certainly not made to the upper management of FCPS. It's certainly not made to the mid-level management at the central office. The cuts always fall on the ones that so many of my colleagues on the school board say they're elected to be there for, and that's the students. It's always a negative impact to the students. There is never detriment to the staff of FCPS. And that's what we're seeing today. It's scary to think of the money that's being spent in central office. I mean, we're talking department heads making over $200,000 a year. They're, underlings under them over $100,000 a year. And you sit and actually look at some of these job titles and you question, what is it that they're actually doing for the students to deliver services, to produce curriculum? And what's interesting is I really haven't been able to figure it out yet. So many of the individuals at the Frederick County Public Schools building in downtown Frederick, um, I gotta say, I don't necessarily know if I was to walk into their office if they could actually justify their existence as an employee of FCPS. Personally, with the way that the current budget is structured, we always talk about in budgeting, they talk about these things called efficiencies. Well, if I look down at the 17.5 efficiencies that the superintendent found at the central office for this past budget, I gotta say I appreciate that, but I think we could do a little bit better. I'm looking for an across the board 25% reduction in staffing at the central office. I think that's a good place to start. And why I say that is because our entry-level teachers, our mid-level teachers, our instructional assistants, and the folks who actually make our school system tick, they're asking for more money, but they're the ones who's serving our students. They're the ones who's on the front line. Well, we certainly could give them a pay raise across the board, but we have to cut some of the pork. And the fact of the matter is that we have too many fire chiefs and not enough firefighters in our schools. To use the old fireground analogy, we have too many people who are in management. We are top heavy. And at some point, we have to say if we want to raise the pay of those in the lowest paid positions, we have to eliminate some at the top. And that's exactly what I think needs done at FCPS.
Sounds about right to me. And I would also say that might apply to the schools as well. The problems that we're experiencing in many of the schools have to do with scale. You get problems in a high school of 2,000 students that you don't get in a high school of 500.
Sure.
So, and the same goes for middle and elementary schools. For example, Oakdale Elementary has about 1,000 students. So Oakdale Elementary has about twice as many students as Walkersville High School did when I was there.
Right.
So what do you get with a school that big? Well, you get a lot of kids who get lost in the shuffle.
Absolutely. I mean, the individualized attention is not there. I mean, obviously, class size is a big thing that we talk about year to year. And certainly, our current board, while we are the current inheritors of the problems as they are, we have a problem here in Frederick County going back several decades to where we allowed increased development without ensuring that our infrastructure was in place. That goes back to the old county commissioners model, and we really did a disservice there. I don't think that some of that development was thought through. And also, one of the other problems that I've seen is as you have had these developments built throughout the county, there's no place necessarily specific, but there were concessions that was made for developers to, say, for example, put a bypass in to allow traffic to go around a development, or putting in schools or a firehouse or whatever it is. And in so many of these instances, the county has allowed the developers to get away with not doing those things. And in turn, we've created a situation where our county infrastructure, whether it's schools or otherwise, has not kept up with the continuing to demand here in Frederick County for the governmental services that is being required. So at some point, we have to pump the brakes on development here in Frederick County and allow our infrastructure to catch up. I know a lot of folks in the construction trades probably don't want to hear that, but let's be honest, there's plenty of remodels and other things that can be done around this county to keep you busy until our developments restart. But we do have to let our infrastructure catch up here in Frederick County.
I would note that a lot of the development being done in the county right now is by out-of-town developers, even out-of-state developers. So, you got your local guys. Yeah, they can make a good living with remodeling and
Sure.
things like that. The only people that aren't making money when development slows down are the big out-of-town developers.
Absolutely.
The ones that don't care about the schools.
Well, and you know, a perfect example of this, if you look, is Butterfly Ridge Elementary. That's an interesting situation there. I would encourage anybody that would like to know about Butterfly Ridge, go back and actually look at where the county schools was actually initially designated to put Butterfly Ridge. Interestingly enough, when you build a development, what's one of the first things you do? You put roads in and so on and so forth. Well, would you like to know, if you look at the Butterfly Ridge development, where the school was slated to be built if it wouldn't have been for the city of Frederick? It was at the back of the development. Now, why is that important? Because in order for the school to be built, a road had to be put in. And guess who was going to be on the hook for the road? It certainly wasn't the developers of Butterfly Ridge. It was the county school system. So if it would not have been for the leadership of Frederick city government, who donated a piece of property that was supposed to be a park at the front of Butterfly Ridge's development, it was over an $18 million piece of property that was given to the county school system. The county school system would have got the short end of the stick. Well, why are we not asking for better deals? Why are we not asking for better concessions from these developers that's coming in and overcrowding our schools, that's coming in and overrunning our healthcare system and overrunning our law enforcement and our fire and emergency services? We're not. We are getting screwed by the big out-of-town developers. Make no mistake, it is not our local developers, not our local construction companies that's creating these situations. It is big business that's coming from outside of our community and outside of our county that just doesn't care about the citizens here in Frederick County, that's creating these situations that are ripe with the problems we have.
So far we've talked about how, well, the fact that the public schools here are subpar. We've talked about why they're subpar. So let's shift to the topic of, how do we create great schools?
Well, that is an excellent question. So I was on a school tour here this past week at the Frederick Classical Charter School, which is under the FCPS wing. And I would say that one of the first things that I noticed is the attitude. Now, I know a lot of people is going to say, well, that just sounds very hokey, very basic. But no, I got to say, I think that it starts with the attitude. One of the first things I noticed when I walked in the school and speaking with their principal and their vice principal, you know, they didn't refer to their pupils as students. Do you know what they referred to them as? Scholars. Well, why is that important? We're setting through context, through language, we're setting up our students, in their case, scholars, for expectations higher than they normally would have been in a traditional public school setting. Now, obviously, the charter school model is not for everyone, but I think in looking at that with the attitude and the expectations, I think that's the first place to start. We have to start setting standards for our students. One of the next things I noticed as I walked around Frederick Classical Charter, and again, keep in mind, this is a Frederick County public school that falls under the charter system. I was amazed. Would you believe that from kindergarten, their students are learning a foreign language, either Spanish or Latin? Now, if you're instructing students from a young age in a foreign language, they're going to go on to master that foreign language by the time they get into middle school. They're going to be conversational. We are setting these kids up in Frederick Classical Charter for a absolute lifetime of enjoying learning and a lifetime of curiosity. And I don't think that the standard schools here in Frederick County is really setting kids up to be curious, to want to learn, and to be engaged. Something else that I noticed, and it's all little small things, but these small things just add up and build on the roadway to success. As we entered these classrooms at Frederick Classical Charter, these students, when they would speak with you, they would rise up and look you in the face, eye to eye, and engage in a conversation with you. That's not something that is comfortable and not something that is generally something people do, but it's something that can be taught. And as part of the culture, again, it goes back to attitude and setting a culture. Frederick Classical Charter School has set a culture of success. And I think that if you was to talk to any teacher worth their salt, regardless of what subject they taught, I believe that they would be interested in fostering a culture of success in their classroom. And we need to encourage our teachers through professional development and through our standards in the school system of setting up that culture of success. I'll build on to that again. I went into a third grade classroom at Frederick Classical Charter, and interesting diversity in and this was a reading class that I was in. They had their books out, and they were at different levels of proficiency in reading. You could definitely tell some were in chapter books, some were in books that was much thinner, that was kind of closer to a beginning reader. But let me tell you, the penmanship that I seen in that class was second to none. I'm even talking about my own high school student who's in 10th grade. I literally could look at the penmanship that those students was being taught in that class, and it puts my 10th grade son who's in Frederick County Public Schools to shame. Again, I think it comes down to creating that environment, and some of that has to do with class size. Of course, their class size at Frederick Classical Charter is a big influencer on the individual attention a teacher can give, and I think that that's something that FCPS really needs to work on. That's one of the things that I've heard in various comments from parents is that, especially places like Centerville and Oakdale, their class sizes are absolutely exploding and out of control. And again, that goes back to the idea that the infrastructure was not in place when developments was built, and we continue to enroll students. So we have to work on reducing class size. That has to be a goal of this board and boards going forward. We're probably 10 years behind building schools here in Frederick County to where they should have already been built. And that's a very concerning piece too. And it's interesting, the last tax increase here on property taxes in Frederick County, County Executive Jessica Fitzwater committed to that money going directly to the Board of Education. So I'm going to be curious to see how much of an increase in funding we actually get towards building schools, because to me that's one of the places that we definitely need to be investing. We need to make sure that our kids are not in overcrowded classes. So that's one of the successes of the charter schools that I've seen. But again, going back to fostering an atmosphere both where our educators and our students can succeed, we've co-opted that and traded that for woke ideology and for virtue signaling, and certainly social service providing. We need to get back to the business of educating, reading, writing, arithmetic, social studies, and science. And that is, the wholesome curriculum that you look at these like places like Frederick Classical Charter School. Their curriculum is top down about the student. It is to make them the most successful, and we need to recommit ourselves as a Board of Education and the county school system to doing just that.
So there's a trend nationwide to get the cell phones out of the schools.
Sure.
It's happening all over the country, and you've got entire states banning cell phones from all the schools. The whole country of France has banned cell phones in schools nationwide. What would you think about banning cell phones in Frederick County?
I think it's a mixed bag, honestly. As a parent of 3 kids in the county school system, the reason I send my kids to school with a cell phone is considering the fact that we have to be concerned of our students' safety at school as priority number 1. I send my kids with a cell phone. I mean, you think about Uvalde, Texas, right? The horrible massacre we had in the school there. They literally had students calling from the classroom with their cell phones advising law enforcement where the shooter was. If you take away the cell phones from the students for the real purpose why parents, at least as myself as a responsible parent, why I send them to school with them, I don't send them with a cell phone to sit there and play around on cruising YouTube or playing games. I send them there with a simple idea of them having a phone for the safety and security, being able to call the authorities, or a trusted adult. I think that we can maybe solve the cell phone problem in a more creative way. I mean, you have airplane mode, you have do not disturb mode. Why are we not working to have our students go ahead? Why not try a pilot program of them putting their phone onto do not disturb mode and having it in such a way that they're not connecting to some of these apps and things? I think that there's things that we can do. I'm not a fan of locking phones in the front of the classroom. Again, you get into the same situation. If a student has to leave the classroom, you're back to the student not having the phone. Your only real choice, if you're not going to permit the phones at school, I don't think it makes sense to lock them up, is to just leave them at home. So there does have to be some parental buy-in to get on board to say, hey, we send our kids with the cell phones for this reason. Let's work to limit the use by X, meaning we're going to put it in airplane mode. We're going to put it in do not disturb. I think that there can be a buy-in by parents. We just need to see if that would work. If that won't work, then obviously I think we do need to go the route of banning the phones completely. Again, not a fan from the aspect of safety. And also accountability, because, of course, everybody that has a cell phone now has a video camera. Now, of course, our students are told they're not allowed to record in school, which I would argue is a violation of the First Amendment of the United States, because everybody who has a camera theoretically is a member of the press now, because we have the ability to post on social media. So I think for accountability purposes, you have yet another argument to why cell phones should be allowed in the schools. And I may even take it a step further to say that I think that some would potentially like to restrict phones in the schools to stop the accountability that we've seen over the years of students videoing teachers who's maybe engaged in a behavior that is certainly less than professional. So I think that the cell phone piece goes very deep. I think that it's not a discussion that can just be, a yes or no. I think that there's a lot of gray area there. Certainly, it would be nice if we could just go back to flip phones, right? If everybody just had the old school flip phone, you didn't have the pocket PC, this probably really wouldn't even be much of an argument, would it? Because phones were going back to what they were intended for. So maybe there's a parental buy-in of sending the students back to flip phones for safety. We could even maybe get into that. If you regulated the type of phone that was allowed in school, perhaps that would stop some of the social media browsing and the bullying on social media that goes back and forth in schools. I think that there's varying things, but it's going to take a parental buy-in. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all solution, and I think that it's a more nuanced discussion about cell phones than just should we get rid of them or should we keep them. I think that there's a lot of questions to answer and a lot of actions to be taken. I just don't know if I'm ready to say I want to ban them entirely on the basis of both safety and accountability.
Sure. Well, that leads me into discipline. All right. So let me take you back to Walkersville Middle School.
Okay.
1980. All right. I'm on the playground. I kicked Jimmy Tressler in the head.
Okay.
Teacher sees me. It's like, yeah, you're going up to the office. So I go to the office. There's Big Dave Marple. All right. He used to play pro basketball for the Washington Bullets.
Okay.
Big guy. Sits me down and says, all right, I can paddle you or I can call your dad. And I was like, yeah, you better paddle me. So he gave me 2 juicy ones. All
Sure.
right? God, they stung. And he's like, yeah, get out of here. So I have to say, that experience, it scarred me. It scarred me for a good 3 minutes. And, and I got the message, and there was no more shenanigans.
It made you stop and think, didn't it?
Darn right it did. Now, the interesting thing was, I find out years later that the first thing that the principal did after he paddled me, he called my dad and said, I just paddled your kid. My dad said, yeah, he deserved it. Thank you. Good job. So that's the way discipline was done back then.
Sure.
And it worked. It worked. And from what I hear these days from the teachers is that they're not being supported in their disciplinary decisions. When they discipline a kid in the classroom, when they make a decision, okay, you need to leave, or I'm going to administer a punishment, something like that.
Right.
Not corporal, but whatever punishment, that they're not supported by the administrators.
Sure.
If you could talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll start off with one of the problems that I see with this whole conversation is we've created situations to discipline students who maybe really shouldn't be disciplined for some of the things that we're disciplining them for, which creates angry parents that comes out and then questions the decisions of administrators and staff of the schools. So again, first off, we have to rehone the focus as to what do we actually want to see out of our kids? Those expectations, that attitude that we talked about in the beginning, we have to rehone that focus, retrain both our staff and our students into what we expect. So we have to lay out those expectations. That's number one. From there, once the student knows what's expected of them and the staff has set the expectations, then it becomes clear to the student when they step out of line, I'm going to be punished for X, fill in the blank. At that point, they know there's going to be consequences, and the parents have been advised of what's expected. There has to be a buy-in from the parents. This all goes back to a communication problem within our schools. If the communication is there to communicate the expectations, and the expectations makes legitimate sense across the board to students, to staff, to parents, and the community as a whole, well, then those staff and the teachers will be supported in their disciplinary decisions. So it comes back to a culture in FCPS of choosing sometimes the woke political ideology and sacrificing students' disciplinary records for that ideology. Instead,
an ideology that I would observe doesn't include boundaries.
No, and it's certainly subjective. So, sometimes some of the same things that, say, a student does in one class that's completely acceptable because maybe the teacher realizes, hey, that's kind of common sense. What you're doing is really not a big deal, and I'm just going to let it go. The next teacher in the next classroom makes a deal out of it and sends a referral down to the office for the same thing. So we have a lack of consistency and discipline across the board. So we really have to go back and retool what it is that we want to demand of our students. Once we set the expectation, our staff knows, our students knows, you get that parental buy-in because the communication is being made to home, and then your disciplinary decisions aren't going to be questioned. And again, you have to remove the items from the disciplinary practices that are creating situations for students to either be caught up in a trap of woke political ideology, or even worse, having their rights violated by disciplinary actions being taken against them for something that is falling within maybe their religious rights, maybe it's their free speech rights, but these children are being co-opted. So you can't really truly have true discipline until we take out some of the things that the majority of people is going to object to being disciplined for. So once we do that, I think we can set some clear standards, we can set the clear expectations, and everybody will buy in with a proper communication home.
That sounds great. Well, Colt, thank you very much for talking with me about why the public schools here are failing and how to fix them.
Well, thank you, Chris, for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again.
This concludes another session of the Recivilized podcast. To hear more sessions with various guests, visit the Recivilized website at www.recivilized.site.